So yeah, within Power Automate, we have expressions, and expressions allows you to write some form of code to do some calculations, to get some data, to do some conversions, right? So there are different fields, and once you're on different actions within Power Automate, you will see two options. You will see dynamic content and you will see expression, right? So dynamic content allows you to select from the output of previous steps, which is something we've seen before, like the last time we talked about Power Automate. But expression also allows you to select from the output of previous steps, but alongside that, you can write some expressions or you can use some functions to manipulate that data. So, for example, if you are getting the output of a previous step, that is maybe the date that it was approved, right? So maybe you've done an approval request and you want to capture the date it was approved. So you've taken that output from the previous step, but maybe you now want to, sorry, so maybe you want to manipulate that date, and instead of the full date, you want to select just the month, for example. You can write an expression to extract that data, right? If you look at the screen now, you will see we
Sorry,
have, yeah,
sorry, sorry to cut you. So the expression
yeah.
is manipulating the output. So you already have an output. So it's going to now change the outputs, modify it. Is that it?
Yes, and that depends on what you want to do. In some cases, you don't even need to select an output of a previous step when you're using expression. But in some other cases, maybe you want to manipulate the output of a previous step, just like I've said. You have a date field, right? But you don't need a full date, you only need the months. You can use your expression to select just the months from that. Or even look at these options that show up, add days. So maybe you are having a process that says 30 days after it has been approved, send a notification to somebody, maybe to the line manager, right? So once it is approved, you can now do addDays. So you can see addDays. So you can say addDays, the dates it was approved, 30. So that's just typically saying 30 days after it was approved. And you can decide what you want to do in that. And interestingly, this is a delay, right? So maybe you want to send a notification 10 days after something has been approved. You can do a delay and say delay, add days to the date it was approved, 10 days, right? So that means it will wait on that delay action for 10 days. After 10 days, it will continue. So that's the value of expressions. You can add some extra logic just by typing your expressions. And there are loads of different expression options. When we get into the platform, we'll see the different areas you can use expressions. So, and this is telling us some reasons why you use expressions, right? So something like what I just mentioned. Sometimes you want to convert types. So maybe something is coming out as a string, but you know it is a number, right? And you need it to be a number. You can use your integer int expression to convert that output to an integer, right? And you can do vice versa. Or maybe you want to convert it to a float or to something else. You can do that. You can perform calculations like string manipulation. So maybe you have first name, you have last name, and you want to combine it together. You can use an expression to combine it. And there are some, maybe you want to build a string. So maybe you want to send, like, give like an output that, or maybe the name of the user is, and maybe the name of the user is K, right? So you can concatenate. Concatenate is the idea of joining strings together. So you can concatenate the name of the user is and concatenate it with the output of a previous step, the name of the user, right? And with that, you're able to build a complete string. You can use it to generate data like current time. I use this a lot. So yes, there's an expression called UTC now. So UTC now just gives you the current date and time, right? So in some cases you want to have the current date and time, you can just use UTC now and you get that. There's also an expression called GUID. So a GUID is a data type, and a GUID is, and I must have mentioned it when we were talking about Dataverse, because when Dataverse stores a unique ID of a record, it stores it as a GUID. If you look at a GUID, it looks like a text, but in terms of the data type, is not a text, it's a GUID data type. So in some cases, you have a text which is the text variable that is which is the ID, right? But for the system to understand that it is a GUID, you need to pass it into a GUID. So it's just like type conversion, like what I said about int, right? So maybe you have it as a text, but you know it is an int. You can do int to convert it to an int. So same thing with a GUID. If you have that text, which is the unique ID, um, which is a text data type, right? And you want to convert it to a grid, you can use the grid function, and that just changes the text into a grid so the system understands what it is. You can use
And
expressions to
that's and
generate.
that
Yeah, go on.
and that apply to, let's say you have a sales record, then
Yeah,
you can now say you want to use a grid to automatically even generate numbers. So let's say you have an order, like, oh,
yeah,
good, let's say order ID. So it will
yeah.
automatically generate order IDs by
Random
itself
numbers. Yes, you can use the grid
randomly.
function to generate like random grids numbers too.
And you
So
also say that it should generate it what's it called?
like in
Sequentially.
sequence. No,
Yeah.
I don't believe so. We can check up on the properties. There might be some like extra properties for you to specify. But I think my understanding of grid is just like it's just random if you get. So but we can check that out to be sure. So handling optional values. In some cases, maybe the action you are trying to use always expects a value, right? So maybe you must always pass a value into that expression, into the action. But what happens if the previous action doesn't have a value, right? You can write some conditions. You can say, oh, if so is equal to null, then maybe make the output not available. So in that case, you are making sure the next action doesn't fail because you have been able to check to see if it has a value. If it doesn't have a value, you have been able to pass something to it, right? So something that maybe you're expecting as a null value. So rather than you passing like an empty value, you can pass something to it. So it's just the whole idea of expressions is you are able to write code to manipulate the data, right? To get it to the way you want it to be. And once we get into the platform, we'll just play around with it a little bit. Um, so now you've been hearing expressions, right? And in Power Apps, we've been doing Power Effects. Unfortunately, the expressions in Power Automate as at today is different from Power Effects. So it's also similar in the sense of it is also using kind of human readable text, right? So it's kind of helpful in terms of it's not like Java or something like that. It's still kind of similar to Excel functions, right? But it is just different. It's not the same exact thing. There's been talk about unifying it and making Power Effects the same language across the Power Platform. So I'm sure there's some work behind the scenes. But right now it's still different. So you kind of be learning something different, which is why some people are not so they are not so good when it comes to expressions because it's different. It's different from Power Effects. So if you have loads of Power Effects knowledge, it's not entirely going to help you. It might help you in terms of knowing some of the things that are possible, but the way it's written. So, for example, concatenate. The way you concatenate, for example, in Power Effects, you can concatenate text. In in expressions, you can also concatenate text, but the way you write the code to achieve the concatenation is different, right? So if there's something you know is possible in Power Apps, you can find out if it is possible in the expressions, right? And also, when you're using expressions, it saves you some actions. I'm sure earlier on when I talked about Power Automate, I must have mentioned that every action contributes to like the usage capacity, right? Every action is a call. So say you're setting a variable, you are calling an API to set a variable, and every API call, it's like Microsoft counts it, right? So you can't build a Power Automate flow that has unlimited actions. There is a limit of the number of actions you can have within a flow. So in some cases, instead of using an action, you might just use an expression to do things that you might have done with multiple actions. So maybe something that you will have needed three actions to do, you might just do it with an expression. For example, calculation. There increment a variable. So maybe you have a variable, is an integer variable. You want to add one to it. You can fetch variables and you will see an action to do that. Or you can just write an expression that says current value plus one. So once you get more familiar with expressions, you will see other ways you can use them. Now, another way that the platform helps when it comes to expression is it groups the expressions into different categories. So you kind of get a feel of, what say you're trying to do something, you just think, okay, what category does it fall into? So for example, I'm trying to um I'm trying to join numbers together. I'll be thinking of string functions, right? And here we can see examples of string functions. So you can concat, so you can use a concat which combines strings together. In PowerFX, this is called concatenate. So the name of the function in PowerFX is concatenate, but within expressions here is concat, right? So those are just some of the nuances you need to be aware of. So we have other ones, substring, replaced. So all these fall under string functions. Now over here, you see we have a see more, right? So it groups them. Then if you want to see more, you can click on that and it just shows you the full list of string functions available. Okay, so that's something to do note, especially when you're just trying to explore and find out the different things you can do with expression. That grouping really, really helps. Okay, are we on track?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a link here which I'll try to get. Let me see if it opens it up. So this is like a reference list of the expressions available, which can be useful, well, as a form of a learning resource for you to be able to figure out what are the different options available. And so things like this, I always just like to read them. Read them not for the purpose of memorizing, but for the purpose of familiarity, such that if I now come across a scenario where something like that is needed, I can call back on my memory and say, oh, I think I've seen something like this before, right? Then at that point, I can do a proper deep dive and find what I'm looking for. So, but I'll recommend just go through this. Well, it's a long list, but I'll recommend just have a read of it. It's going to help you so much on the long run, in terms of understanding what is available. Um, so there are some other, these are some important expressions, um, outputs. Now we will see this when we get on the platform, but even all the dynamic content that we select, and I will show you, all the dynamic content that we select are actually expressions, right? But Power Apps have just done it in a way that you don't have to type all those expressions. They've given you a GUI to select it, but behind the scenes, once you select something from dynamic content, it actually writes an expression. So I say that because that can also help you understand expressions. If you've selected something from dynamic content, hover your mouse on it. Interestingly, I think they've taken that away from the new UI. I hope not. I don't think so. I think it's still in the new UI. But if you hover your mouse on it, you would see the actual expression it wrote. So things like outputs returns an object with outputs from a step. Body returns an object with properties from a step. Trigger body. So when an automation is triggered, it saves it. There's a property called trigger body, which you can connect to and use that to get some. If so, say something was triggered from SharePoint, now you can get some properties like who triggered it, when was the record triggered, was the title, the things you have on the SharePoint list comes up within the trigger body. We have items, so when you're in an apply to each loop, the item property can be selected to know what the current item. So when something is looping through a list of items, right? The item property can give you, you can use it to get data from the current item. Variables also parameters, that comes when you're using environment variables. We will, when we get on the interface, we'll just hover around and see what we mean by this. So these are some common expressions. Maybe you take a screenshot of this, maybe you just look at it. All this will be on that reference list that I've shared with you, and there'll be more details about them. But yeah, just as a rough overview, these are a list. We have the coalesce. Coalesce is a very nice one that I like to use. It's return and is also present in Power Effects. So coalesce returns the first non-null value. So maybe you have maybe you want to make sure you are returning something, right? So similar to what I said before. So if object one is false, it's not going to return that. If object two has a value, and you have coalesce object one, object two. If object one is null, it will return object two. So you can just stack them over each other. I don't know. Have you played with coalesce before?
I've used coalesce in Power BI.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, it's going to be the same concept also. So it returns the first null value, and you can use it to just preserve your data integrity, right? We also have GUID, which we talked about.
Sorry,
Replace,
let me ask.
yeah,
This
yeah,
coalesce,
yeah.
can you store objects into like a variable and then now coalesce that variable?
Yes, you can. But so with coalescing multiple variables, what do you mean?
No, so let's say we have object one, object two, and all of that. This would be like, I'm thinking in terms of like, not even Power BI, in terms of like maybe programming like Python now.
Yeah,
You
okay.
can create like functions, right?
Yeah.
And then you store like these objects into it, and then you now use that, apply that coalesce, and then it will now bring out the objects that is stored inside that um, function or variable. It will bring out the one that is not null.
Let me think of where I've used coalesce. I use it a lot. Okay, so one is coming to mind now. Oh, don't mess with my microphone. So one is coming to mind now. So I say I have a variable. Let me just bring up the interface, the Power Apps interface maybe. So I'm going to create a new app. I'm not going to start from a new, so let me go back. New app, start with the page design, back canvas. So, So let's say coalesce. Say one. Okay. So this is just the general idea of coalesce, right? If you have something that is returning a null, blank is null, right? And I can say this, maybe I have one, two, three, right? So, but you notice this is just giving me one, right? So that's what coalesce does. Coalesce checks the first item. Is it null? Is it blank? Is it null? If it's that, it's going to skip. Is this blank? Is this null? If it's blank or null, it's going to skip. Then it's going to return the first non-null value. So once it just finds one, is happy, it just returns it, right? So the reason why we do this sometimes is, so maybe I'm calling like a power automate expression here and it's to return a value, right? What happens if it returns blank and I need, so maybe I'm doing a calculation. Maybe I have like a button here. I have a button that says notify value of this guy, the text divided by 2, right? So if this stuff returns a null, okay, it just says says it's being smart there. But let me see. 1 divided by, what if I say 2 divided by this? I'm trying to make it error. But it seems, oh, I think value itself, this value actually converts it. So yeah, that's not gonna error. Okay, invalid operation division divided by 0. Good. So when we look at this now, so say this guy, where's the text? So this label, so I have just put blank here, right? But imagine this is like a something like a variable that a power automate expression is returning, or maybe that it could be any value, but it could also be null. So in order for me to make sure that it never errors, I can now say coalesce this and I can put 1. So fine, if this one is a real value, so maybe if this one is 5, everybody is happy, right? It's going to respect 5 and it will give me the value based on that being 5. You can see it has shown 5 over here. But what in case, just in case, instead of 5, this returns a blank, I've added my coalesce there as a fail-safe. So I know I'm always going to get something in here. So if this is blank, then now this is just going to return 1. So that's what coalesce does. It returns the first non-null value. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I guess it makes sense. What I was asking was, I was thinking in terms, and I don't really know if it applies like this in
Yeah.
Power Apps. So let's say you have first name, last name, email,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
let's say you wanted to call this, and first name is blank, last name is blank,
Yeah.
email is blank, right?
Yeah.
So how would you now call? So my question was, is it so? So I said something about storing those. Can you store first name, last name, email, everything into into a box, into a
Do you mean like
content, into a defined?
into, it depends. Is it an array or is it a string? So
I would
maybe
say,
now this is an array now. First name, um, last name. then email. Why is this not okay? Because this is expecting a text, right? So, but this is an array now. Let me just put let me just have like that array. Okay. So this is an array. Does this illustrate what you're trying to say?
Yes, exactly. Give me a second. Let me
Okay.
just attend to this guy. Yeah, boss. Sorry, Jerry.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah.
Something
Because I
just
think once
happened
it's
as I closed
11:30,
it.
once it's 11:37, we're going to break.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so yeah, you said this is kind of what you were picturing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what are you trying to do with
Let's.
Koalis?
So let's assume. I think this is a more. I don't know if this applies to our apps. I guess it doesn't apply. Come on,
Mm,
Charles. It does. I don't think it applies because if it's like other program, if it's a programming language like maybe Python or something, you can
yeah.
store all these variables right into a function that you can call at any time, and all of them will now appear,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you now say you want to coalesce that function that you have stored all these guys into, and then
Mm,
it will now they will appear individually.
yeah, I don't think that's not really what Koalis does. So in terms of getting all of them appearing,
Yeah.
maybe this guy dot all items. But yeah, you can't coalesce it in that sense. Coalesce requires like individual values to be supplied, like coalesce item one, comma, item two, comma, item three. So if we want to do like a coalesce for this, yeah, it's going to be much more complicated, but we can potentially say coalesce um should I say? I don't know. Let me try index table index. So let me see. This guy one doesn't like
Control.
that. Let's see if I say dot value. Still don't like it. If I say dot value. Okay. So this one, comma, two, comma, three. So in this case, I'm saying, so the first item on the index is first name, the second
Yeah.
is last name, the third is email. So now is returning first name because our first name has a value, right? So it's returning only first name now. But say this first name doesn't have a value, say it is blank. So in this case, now is returning last name because first name is blank, right?
Mhm.
Then if last name is also blank, then at that point it's going to return email because first name and last name is blank. Then now it's returning email. So yeah, I don't know if that's what you were trying to say, but
Yeah, that would have been the part B of the question.
yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So yeah, that's Koalis is very useful, especially when you're looking at, preserving data integrity. Then now you have other stuff which I'm not really going to go into, but it's good to know they're possible. GUID replace, replace, maybe you want to replace this like like a text with another one. Equals, you can use it to like compare if it returns true if both values are equal to each other. We have UTC now, which is the one I was telling you about, that generates like the current date and time. We have ticks. Not sure what that's useful for, but it says return the number of ticks since January 1, 2001. I don't know what that is. So then the string can convert a number to a text, things like that. We have JSON. So if you have like a text and you know that it is JSON, you can use the JSON function so that the system understands that yes, you're using it as a JSON. And yeah, there are different ones. Conditions too is very, very useful. Conditions can actually you can use it to do true, false conditions. There's actually a condition action, but as I said, in some cases, rather than calling an action, you could just use an expression, and that will just save you an API call, which will make your phone flow possibly run faster and you know it becomes less, it uses
Sorry,
less
come again with that.
yeah, so I said if you can do it with an expression, that can possibly make your flow run faster because it's reducing the number of API calls you are making, right? So there are some things that you can also do as an action. For example, condition. There's a condition action that you can select to do conditions, right? But in some cases, you don't need that. You can just put it in an expression and, just check your condition straight away from there. And that will just save you API calls. Handling on values you get. So this is an example of what I've said with the coalesce function. So if I say in this case, if this body content is null, then we are able to pass a default value, right? So we are going to make sure that our future step is not going to fail because we are passing a default value, even though the result of the action that we wanted came back as null, right? So trying to use a property that's not set will cause a flow to fail, right? So you can use your coalesce to just provide a default value so that it doesn't fail. Okay, so let's go on to the Power Automate website and just look at a couple of things around expressions. So we go to make the powerautomate.com. And I'm just going to go and create a new flow. So for this, I'm going to choose automated flow. So we see something in terms of trigger output. So I'm just going to call this test flow. Now, so say we're using like a SharePoint trigger, and we say maybe when an item is created, right? And I click on create. So now, so let me choose a SharePoint. I'm just gonna check. I should have something here. So let me just say this one, communication site and the list available. So maybe this books one, right? So basically this flow will be triggered when a new book is created. Now I can come over here and let me say I want to send an email. Okay, so I can say send an email v2. Maybe I want to send it to myself. Let me just search. Okay. Now, say I want to include some information from the book, right? So over here, this is dynamic content in action. Right here, you can see we can, okay, so before I get there, now this is the new designer interface. So once you're on a field that requires an input, you will see two options here. You will see dynamic content, right? This one that has the thunder icon is the dynamic content. Then the other bit where you see FX, that's the expression, right? So if I come to dynamic content for a start and say I want to get some data. Remember, I said dynamic content allows you to select something from the previous action, right? So in this case, when an item created is the previous action. So that's why we are seeing different properties or parameters or, well, values or responses from this previous step, which is the when an item is created. Now, on this list, you actually see when an item is created, right? That's how you know where these values are coming from. Now, so for example, say I want to get the title of the record, and now I've passed that in. But remember, I said every dynamic content is actually an expression. So if I come over to the subject here and where I've selected title, if I hover on it, can you see there is like an expression that comes up?
Mhm.
And you can see that says trigger body, open bracket, close bracket, question mark, then title, right? That's to select the title. So what that means is instead of selecting dynamic content, I could actually come here and say trigger body, right? Then question mark, this, then type in title. And once I select add, you can see basically I've added another one without choosing from dynamic content, right? Because
Yeah.
dynamic content itself is done by expressions. So, but dynamic content is just Power Up saying, okay, well, I'm just going to give you out of the box, right? But that doesn't mean you can't write your expression. Let's choose another one. For example, let's see created by email because that's a bit complex. Now, if I hover on this, you see it says trigger body, open bracket, author slash email, right? So that means I can do it this way also and say trigger body, question mark, author slash email. And once I say add, that's basically selected it for me, right? So that's
Mm.
just like the foundation. You can use expressions in this way. So let's explore the different categories
Do
of,
you,
yeah.
sorry, so are you able to have more than one expression in the subject?
Well, the subject is just a text, so you can have as many things as possible. You can even type in stuff, you can say, oh, here
To add everything all
is your
together.
book. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically, you're kind of building a string here because this expects a string. So whatever you type in here is just going to come out that same way as the subject. So maybe it can be, maybe you want to say the name of the person. So in a more realistic scenario, you might be like, oh, maybe the author or created by display name. Say, here is your book, right? Something like that. Then maybe you can now put the name of the book also. So it's going to say the name of the person who created the record. Here's your book. And it's going to put the title, which I believe holds the name of the book. So let's explore the different categories of expressions, right? So you can see here we have string functions. If I scroll down, you see we have collection functions. So string functions come into play when you are dealing with text, right? When you're dealing with strings, when you're dealing with text, that's when the string function comes into play. Maybe you want to find, you can see to upper, so maybe you want to make it lowercase, you want to make it uppercase. You want to find where a particular text is within a string. Index starts with, maybe you want to check whether a string starts with a particular text or not. So there are a couple of string functions. We also have collection functions. Now, collection functions come into play when you're dealing with like a list or like an array, right? And you can do different things. So you can find whether an array contains a particular value, right? You can find the length, and this length is if you want to find how many characters a string contains, you can use length. And sometimes maybe you're trying to fetch items. So there's an action called get items, right? So what get items does is it returns, and with get items, you can put in a filter criteria. So when you do get items, or maybe let's even demonstrate it. So I can come here and say get items, right? Let me go on the actual SharePoint list and see. So I think communication site content, then let's see books. Right. Okay, so the title is just the name of the book. I know there is a created by field, so we know who added the book. So maybe the workflow we're going to create now is when a book is added, it's just going to count how many books you have and say, oh, you now have 3 books, or you now have four books, right? So let's do that. So coming back here, so when an item is created, remember, when an item is created on this books list, now we are doing a get item. So we want to see how many books that person has. So what we can do is we can say, so this communication sites, this is books. Now there's something called filter query. Now filter query is a way that you can actually you can filter. So rather than getting all the items, you can choose the condition that you want to check, right? So in this case, you want to check whether you want to check how many books the user has added already. So I can come here and say filter it where no, I think this is, let me try this, author/email. I know it's a bit different when trying to fetch EQ. So this is using what's called OData query, right? OData, so you can see an OData filter query to restrict the entries returned. So I'm going to try this. If it doesn't work, we'll use Copilot to find the actual expression. And it will be good for us to see that also. So EQ, then let me just check for the email of who just created a record. So created by email. Right. So here I'm saying where the author email. So gets items from the books list, where the email of the author, this author email, I'm not sure is correct, where the author email EQ created by email. So based on this one that's just been created, you understand that from a concept level.
Mm.
So basically, if I add a new book, I want to get an email. So now you see I've created two records, right? So if I
Yeah.
add a new book, I want to get an email that says you have added 3 books. Do you get? So it's going to get all the books that I've created and it's going to count them and just tell me how many books I have in total.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get back to the flow. All right. So we're that equals that. And so let's just leave it this way for now. Then to keep it dynamic, let's send it back to the person who just created a record. And we can get that also from dynamic content. So we can say created by email. All right. Okay, so let's give this a test now. And so if I say test and I do manually, so you see a text that says to see its work now, perform the starting action. So let me create a new book. Say things all apart. This will probably fail, which is good. But let's see.
Just a quick question before before this thing finish.
Yeah. Oh,
So yeah, about that created by email. So,
yeah.
so I guess that means the email of the owner of the account.
So the created by email, because I've taken it from this when an item is created, so it's going to be this created by here. So the person who just created a new book. So that's the email of the person we are getting there.
Okay.
So, and we've done that because that means if you add a new book, you will get the email. If I add a new book, I'll get the email. Do you get? So rather than me getting the email every single time. So I know this is wrong. Let's see if Copilot can help us. So within the expression tab, there's this option that says create an expression with Copilot. So let's see if this is going to help us. So let's say create an OData filter query to get items from SharePoint where they're created by email is the current user.
Created is, well, I guess it's still gonna work anyway.
Well, I'll be Oh yeah, the spelling right. I'll be amazed if it does work. Doesn't seem to do anything.
Yeah, I know. Should know what you're trying to do. We'll see.
Oh no, it doesn't like it. Get items. Yeah, it's not giving me a suggested expression. This is not an expression. Create so rather than say created, let me say author. Because I know internally SharePoint represents the creator as author. No, it's not. Filter by author, email, SharePoint. Let's say all data. Okay, that's what we've done. Oh, weird. That would be strange if that works. The M has to be capital. Okay, no, there's no M. Yeah, all data here. No, that's not helpful. But this is what I had before. But what I saw in that stuff is email should be capital M. So let's give that a try. That seems like somebody's mistake that that got pushed to production if that works. Oh wait, it actually worked. Weird. Okay. So I probably have gotten an email, even though it's not done any calculation yet. Okay, so it says, Kayode, here's your book, Things Fall Apart, right? Cool. So we've seen a couple of things, right? Starting from here, we've seen that, to select, so starting from here, we've seen that, every dynamic content is actually an expression, right? And we've seen how you are able to check for that. Now, when using get items, we've used something called a filter query. And what a filter query does is it allows you to restrict the items that are returned to make sure they match only a certain condition. Now over here, you see, yeah, we said the author/email. So this is good to know when you're doing SharePoint and you're trying to filter by like the author's email, the M has to be like a capital M. So EQ created by email. So where the author email is equal to the created by email. So it's going to bring those records. Where I was going, um, I was going to talk about length. So because in some cases, you want to know when the response is zero, like if it is empty. Sorry for the distraction. So in some cases, you want to know if if what it returns is empty, right? So you want to like see the count of what has been returned. So that's where the length function comes into play. So what I can do, um, I can come over here and say, so let's just have it in a compose. So let's create a compose. Now, when talking about compose, remember I said it's just like a sheet of paper, right? Where you can use to track. You can use it to track where things are and to see the values of variables at different points. So let's use a compose here. And let's say we want to see the length. So I'll come over here into expressions. I want to see the length, right? Now, when you're typing expressions, you can still get stuff from dynamic content. So if you scroll down here, sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So when you're doing length here, right? When you're typing expressions, you can still integrate dynamic content in your expression, right? And that falls back into the stuff about manipulating, what has come from a previous step. So you can still select your dynamic content. So if you come down here, you see we have function, but to the right of that, we have dynamic content. So you can still select dynamic content within your expression. So in this case, I think I want body value. So is it a body value or value? I just switch around to find out. So, but you notice as I selected body value, I see this come up. It says output get items. What's get items? This step, right? So the items that have come from this step, I'm seeing the body, and here it says body slash value is list of items, right? Now I want to see the length of that. What is the length? So how many items are within, how many items were returned basically. So if I click on add, let me rerun this flow. So I'm going to use automatically so we don't have to create a new record and save and test. Okay. So now for the compose says 3, right? Because if we come onto the list, we will see that we have 3 items. Now, if we come to get items again, now, as you continue to build Power Automate flows, you'll get used to doing this. So once you select an action, you can scroll down and you see show outputs. All right, so for every action, can you hear me? Sorry for the distraction.
Yeah.
Okay. So every action in Power Automate, as I've mentioned before, there are API calls, right? Generally, when dealing with APIs, there is like, oh, well, you even see headers and stuff like that, right? But when dealing with APIs, you can pass in parameters and an API will send a response, right? So that's why we have input and output. So input are the parameters you send. So you can see we have the host, the parameters, all of those stuff. You can see even our filter query, all of that goes into the input. Then it goes ahead, then brings back an output, right? And this output, all these things that you're seeing here, this is what shows up in your dynamic content. So they are JSON. If you notice, this is the JSON response because generally when dealing with APIs, it's JSON, right? So you can see body, that stuff that says body slash value. This is where it comes from. So this is the body, this is the value. So value is within body. That's why we have body slash value. The part where we have author slash email, you can see this is author. Email is inside body, so that's why we have author slash email. So that's just how you start understanding how those values come together. But if you come over here and you see value, you see this is one value, right? This old box represents one item, one of these items that we have here. So if we check here, you would find out that you can see title Harry Potter, right? Title Harry Potter. You can see that's one of the items. Um, Over here, we have another item. and you can see to kill a mockingbird. And here we have another item, which is things fall apart, right? So that's how this came back to return 3, right? Um, so we can now have a condition here that says if the length, so we can have a condition that says if the length of, then we can come to dynamic content, body value, right? If that length, so is what we can say is greater than 0. So let's say if it is greater than 0, delete. Are you not deleting? Let me save. I think. Oh, that's a new behavior. Okay, I think he's always just going to keep this one, but that should not trouble us. Okay, so I can say if the length is greater than 0, then send an email, else maybe it should not do anything. So this will not send an email if I've not created anything before, right? But if I've created something before, it's going to send me an email, so I can test that. Okay, and now I've gotten an email that says, here's your book with the test, right? And maybe to fulfill our original mandate, we can now say, you now have, then we can integrate that length also again. We can say length of this response. You now have this amount of books. Well, I think it's always going to be plural. So if I test this again, now I'm going to get an email. Let's see. Is that I didn't save? Okay, so let me save this and let me add a new book. So can you suggest a book title?
The Art of War.
Okay. The Art of War. Okay, so if everything is fine, I should get an email. Okay, so he says, here's your book. Oh, this is the old one. So I should get another one. Okay, so he says, here's your book, The Art of War. You now have 4 books, right? So that's worked the way we intended the automation to work. A couple of things on this page, which it's possible I've shown you before. Um, over here, you can see the history of your flow runs. Um, so over here, you can see the history of your flow runs. Um, so you see when it ran, and this can help you in troubleshooting stuff. Here you can see all the runs. Note that this runs is going to show you only stuff within the last, I think, 30 days or there's like an amount of days. It's not forever. There's like a limit of the number of days with which or for which is going to show you your history. So that's why it's still good for you to have ways of tracking your flows beyond just this view. Yeah, sorry. I think I don't even know what she wants at this point. Okay. Let's see. So yeah, do you have any questions?
No. Can you just, sorry, I'm taking you back. Can you just summarize it again, like from the top?
Yeah,
Just in summary, I got the general concepts, but like
yeah,
linking it all together again.
yeah. Okay. So basically we had a requirement, right, where there's this SharePoint list that has the names of books. And our requirement is when somebody adds a new book, we want them to get an email to show that includes how many books they have submitted so far. Right, so that's the requirements. Now, coming into the flow, we started with when an item is created, right? Because we want to trigger the flow when somebody comes to create a new book. Then, just after that, we've added a get items because we want to be able to count how many books that person has created before. So we want to do a get items. Get items allows you to get a list from a data source, right? In this case, SharePoint, and we've specified the name of the list we want to get the responses. But to make sure that we don't have to make sure that we select only the books that particular user has created, we added a filter query. Now, what this filter query does is it just checks and says, okay, show me only the items where the creator is equal to who created a record on SharePoint just now, right? So this will only give me my own books. If you create an item, this is going to show created by Tosi, right? And by the time this part comes into play in the flow, it's going to fetch only the books created by Tosi. So even though we are using the same flow, our responses will be different because we've created different amounts of books. So we've just added this compose so we see how many books has been created. We are not really using this compose. We can actually delete it. But remember, I said compose, you tend to use it as part of your troubleshooting steps, right? To just see what a particular value is at a particular time. And that can help you understand what the flow is doing and maybe give you insight on what to do to make it better. So we've done a condition here that says if the length is greater than 0, then we've said send an email. So what happens now is if nothing is returned, so for example, if you look at this list, Tosin has not created any book, right? So if Tosin runs this for the first time, maybe Tosin now creates a new book for the first time, this get items is going to be 1 in that case because he has just created a new book, right? So more or less everybody is going to fall under this category. But this is just showing you that you can have an expression. So if get items defaults to 0, what's going to happen is it's going to fall under this false because of this condition. So it's going to fall under false. That means no email will be sent. But if the user has created a book, they will get an email that says you now have X amount of books, right? And basically that's what the flow does. So it has been able to satisfy our requirements.
Okay. I saw you were trying to do something with Copilot, so I guess that was supposed to um yeah, so that was when you were doing the expressions,
Yes,
and then
yes.
you wanted Copilot to now show you how you
The
can patch it with a
correct.
dynamic content, right?
No, I wanted Copilot to write the expression for me because initially I did author/email, but this email I put a small m, but that failed.
Yeah.
So I wanted Copilot. So if you come over here to expression, rather than you just typing it, they say you can use Copilot to create an expression. So you just describe what you're trying to do, and Copilot will type the expression for you. But in this case, it wasn't successful. It didn't give me the correct answer. So I had to do a Google search, which is where I now found out that, well, I was more or less correct, but this M had to be a capital M for it to be correct. So that was where I wanted Copilot to basically write this for me, but it couldn't do it.
So why did the Copilot fail? I wasn't able to do it. I thought I was supposed to be able to help
Well,
you with this.
it's Copilot. I don't use Copilot a lot, but it probably can do this. Let me see this one. So let's say instead of typing it, let's say, well, and it might also have to do with the way you prompt it anyway. It's giving some examples. It might have to do with the way you prompt it. I don't use this a lot. Yeah, because sometimes it's just easier to do a Google search and you find what you're looking for. But let's see. Let's say create an expression to count the number of items returned from a SharePoint get items action.
Wrong spelling returned.
Yeah, I'll correct that. Maybe it was my bad spelling that made the last one go wrong. Even though Copilot should be able to figure it out. So let's see if it figures this one out. Okay, it did. So now you can see it has written the expression for me. And if I say okay, it just types that. It types it in for me. So even that one might have worked if maybe I prompted it correctly. But
I
this looks
think
like a
your
correct
SharePoint, you
expression.
spelled it wrong there as well
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the SharePoint was small letters.
Right,
Maybe
right.
that's why it didn't work. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's able to help out. And that's the idea because, being a low code platform and Copilot stuff. So Microsoft is just trying to add Copilots to help whoever is work better. And roughly, I think the whole message is if you have an idea of what you want to do and you can prompt it, then Copilot should be able to help you. But well, use it at your own risk. Okay. So yeah, troubleshooting Power Automate cloud flows. So we've seen an example of that, right? And that's where you have this list that shows you how many, that shows you your previous runs and you can see where it failed. You can click into it and try to find out why it has actually failed. Um, okay, so testing and run history. That stuff I showed you is just a run history. we've been able to test a couple of times, and you've seen the difference between manual testing and automatic testing, right? For the when you have, so if I come here and I say edit and I say test, so you see we have two options, manually and automatically. Um, Manually, so automatically is going to run based on a previous run. So in this case, you notice it was only once I created book initially, which was things fall apart, but I was able to test a couple of times without having to come back here to create a new book. So that's automatic. It's just going to run as if that thing was just triggered, even though you've triggered it before. Manual is just you're going to need to perform the trigger action. So whatever the trigger action is, in this case, the trigger action is adding a new record to this SharePoint list. So once I add a new record, then I'm able to trigger it manually.
When should one be used before the other?
Well, it depends
I
on what
think they're
you're
both doing the
doing.
same thing.
Yeah, more or less, they're kind of the same thing, right? So generally, now in some cases where I'm forced to use it is, say I change this flow and I add a new. So maybe previously um I wasn't using let me say get what's this Office 365 Office 365 get users. So if you add a new action entirely that needs a new connection, there's a tendency that automatic is not going to work because the initial trigger doesn't have the details of that connection you've just created. So I've added this get my profile. Let me try and test it automatically. Okay, it actually did work. So in some cases, I know in the real world there are some cases where if you've changed the flow very much and you've changed some connections and things like that, then it will say it cannot trigger and you have to test it again manually. But the general idea is manually the first time. And I think the main difference is when you're using automatic, you're using the data from a previous run, right? But if you want to use new data, or like in this case, you saw initially we created this, we created the things fall apart, right? Then the next time we tested it with the art of war, right? So if you want to test with new data, then you'll be using manual. But if you want to test it with the previous data from a previous run, you use automatic. But at the end of the day, it's still the same thing. They are just two different ways of triggering your flows in the context of testing, right?
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. So, debugging features, right? How can you debug stuff? Well, run history, I already showed you. Testing feature, that's where you can come into a test. Wrong. So that's where you can come into a test. So say you go to a run history now. So maybe you've changed the flow. So like this one that failed before, right? Now I've made some changes and I want to check if I've been able to fix the issue. So I can just come here and do a resubmit. So by the time I do a resubmit, now you see, even though it failed before, it's going to succeed now. So I know that I've fixed. So at this point, I know I've fixed the issue that caused the flow to fail before, right? And compose, I already told you, right? Compose, you can use it to capture variable values or expressions at any point for debugging. So that's also good. Sometimes, remember I mentioned that, well, compose, you generally use it while testing. But in some cases, you can even leave it in the production, like you can leave it in the actual solution so that if anything fails, I can just come here and say, oh, what was the value at this point? Oh, the value was 4. Then maybe instead of 4, if the value was 0, I can now say, oh, maybe that's why it failed. So compose allows you to be able to see the value of your variables or expressions at any point. And if you want to debug, that can help you figure out where things went wrong. Error handling and alerts. I suspect I've talked about error handling, right? Where you have the run after. Yeah, I believe I did the last time. So where you have the different run after, um, run after. So if I come here to settings, I can see run after, and you can decide whether it runs after it is successful, after it has failed, after it has timed out. So you can use those to, have some error handling, and maybe if it goes into, maybe it has failed, then you can choose to send an email or save it in a data source. Okay. Um, okay, so flow checker, yes. Well, we've seen it, but we've actually not talked about it.
Okay, I'm testing. I don't think I've talked about it. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, last class I was a bit in and out, so
No, I don't think we particularly talked about it, but we've most likely used it. So if we come over to the flow checker, over here, just like in Power Apps that we have the app checker, over here we have the flow checker, right? So if you click on that, it just shows you some errors. If there's like an error in your flow, it just shows you some errors. Then, sometimes warnings. Warnings means, yeah, it's bad practice, but it's not a problem until it's a problem. That's a warning. So for example, this is triggered when an item is created, right?
yeah.
Then you now have another action. So maybe I now have a create item. So if I have a create item here and I come here and select that same list and I say books, um, let me give it a title, test, right? And I click on save. Now you can see this is giving me a warning now. And what is telling me in the warning is I may have a circular loop. So what that means is, what do you want? Okay, okay. I want to sleep. I'm watching. So what this is warning us is, do we know what we are doing, right? Because you are triggering a flow when an item is created, and within the flow, you're also creating an item. So you might end up in an infinite loop, right? Where it
Yeah.
just keeps on doing the same thing over and over again, and that can be bad. If you do that in production and you leave it running, it will get to a point that Power Apps will turn off the flow for you because it knows that something is wrong with the flow. But you really don't want to have that, because that means you've probably been doing the same thing over and over for no reason, wasting your API calls, right? So that might, even if it's a central flow, like I once had a system like that where over the weekend it just kept on sending an email, sending an email, sending an email. It blocked the account, the actual account sending an email. The account outlook was affected, the flow itself was affected. It just affected so many things, right? So you want to try and avoid those kind of situations, and that's why the flow checker was giving you us that one in there. In some cases you do it, but you just have a condition, like a stopping condition, but the flow checker would not know that you have a stopping condition. So that's why it's a warning. It's not an error, but it's just like, well, do you know what you're doing? If you know what you're doing, fine. But I'm just telling you that, this is not good practice. So that's what warnings are. But errors, once you have an actual error, you won't even be able to save the flow. So for example, if maybe in this case, maybe I want to send an email, but I don't provide who I want to send the email to, right? So that's like an actual error. and so it's telling me toe is required. So that's just the idea of flow checker. So it's just very straightforward. In many cases, especially when you're dealing with real problems, is not too helpful. But at least it tells you something to give you an idea of what is wrong. Okay. So testing with data from previous run, we've seen that. Um, Now, when something errors, Power Automate is quite helpful to show you where it's errored. So, for example, if we come to this one that errored, right? If we click on it, so you see it tells us that this is the action where it failed. So that can also help you when troubleshooting and when you're trying to find out errors. Then, still on that, still on that, um, the parts where it doesn't go to, it also lets you know. So, for example, you see this minus here and it's gray. So that tells us that it didn't get to that action, right? So you're able to see the areas it went to and the areas it didn't go to. So that can help you when you're troubleshooting to find out where something has gone wrong. Um
It shows
Now,
you where it's worked, where it stopped, and where it didn't
exactly.
get to.
Yes, exactly. So, and even though I did this earlier, but just to mention it, you can also resubmit. So, say a flow has run and is failed, maybe you've made some changes, you can do a resubmit to just retrigger it again, and get it going. So in some even production scenarios, right, there might be something that failed, and you might just have to come in here. Maybe you've resolved whatever caused it. You can resubmit it, and it's just going to trigger the flow again and run the way it was supposed to have run. Okay. You can share your flows. You can share your flows. We've seen how to share apps and stuff. You can also share your flows. So over here in the flow page for that particular flow, you have different options here, and one of them is share. So when you're sharing your flow, unlike Power App where you can have a user and a co-owner, when you're sharing a flow, that user automatically becomes an owner of the flow. So you should also be conscious when you're sharing your flow. So people can use your flow without you sharing it to them. So maybe you have the flow embedded in an app, right? So when people are using the app, they automatically use the flow. So you don't have to share it to them. But if you are taking the effort to share a flow to someone, that means you are adding them as a co-owner. So you are sharing it to them not because they need to use it, but because you want them to be able to edit the flow. So that's something to note. And those are a couple of things. I think we have like a knowledge check here. So let's just give this a try. So you need to perform, and I think we've done this for the previous one classes too. So you need to perform a calculation using related rows in a one-to-many automation. Which automation method should you use? Yeah, I feel like they've just complicated this question. You need to perform a calculation using related rules. Yeah, I wouldn't say this is a
The one to
straightforward one.
many relationship.
They've said a cloud flow, but I think the question is unnecessarily complex. And when you're writing exams, they will do that where they give you unnecessary information you don't need to answer the question, but they give you those information just to, make you confused and start
It's
thinking
like the
of
people
other things.
preparing the questions, they don't want you to feel self.
Well, maybe that's why I don't understand. But yeah, I've noticed that with a lot of Microsoft's exams, they give you. I can't. I can't let you use that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, they say Cloudflow. Um, well, with Cloudflow, you can access records from different areas, even though it's like relationships and stuff. So I don't know. I wouldn't focus too much on this question. I hope the other ones are better questions. So here it says, how can you create a workflow that reoccurs daily? So how,
Use recurrence trigger.
okay, yep, that's correct. Um, so every Cloudflow has two main parts, a trigger and one or more actions. Which of the following best describes an action?
It's between A and C, but I'll go with A.
Okay, so actions are what you want to happen when a trigger is involved. Let's just see. Actions trigger the flow to occur. Yeah, so it's actually A. So actions are what you want to happen when a trigger is invoked. Just like in this our case, right? The trigger was when an item is created in SharePoint. Then we now had a couple of actions. So first of all, we got the items. Next, we sent an email. So those are different actions that we want to occur once the trigger is invoked. So you need to automate a manager being notified of an expense being submitted and when the expense is paid based on the manager's decision. What action should you use? So, well, let me see. So, in fairness to you, we didn't talk about approval. So, it's actually
I think
start
it's
and wait
C.
for an approval. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think we did, but that's always a good one to talk about. So, I'll see if we can still talk about it today. Um, so what does the Dataverse connector list rows actions do? So list rows is just like get items for SharePoint. So basically it just returns like the list of records. So here is the B one that says fetches multiple records from a Dataverse table, which can be filtered according to a logical condition. So you see that's
Also, the
very
command
similar.
for SharePoint is different for the one for
Oh, yes,
Dataverse.
it is. Yes. And a way you can explore what are available is so if you come over here and say you want to add a new action, no, now you see we have different connectors, right? So I can come here and search for SharePoint. And now I'll see, so under SharePoint here, now I can see all the actions available for SharePoint, right? And if it's Dataverse, I can see all the actions available for Dataverse, right? So that's how you're able to find. So list rows, you can see it's over here. So that's how you're able to find out that information. Okay.
Yeah.
So which trigger scope would you select if you wanted the trigger to take an action on a record, regardless of the owner? So this is a Dataverse setting. So this is available with Dataverse, and that will be organization. So let me show you an example. If you come over to, so let's do as if we're creating a new flow. So new flow, let's do automated. Um, let's say Dataverse. Let's search for Dataverse here. Okay, so we have when a row is added. So let's click on this. So if Dataverse is our trigger, right? Dataverse has a couple of things. So like I can say when it is added, Let me just choose account. Now we have scope. So we have different scopes: business unit, organization, parent-child business unit, user. So that's what this question is asking about. So we have different trigger scopes. In this case, if we want it to be regardless of the owner, you choose the organization. So organization is like everything. But remember when we did security rules, we have different scopes. We have business unit. So if it's business unit, it will only work in the context of the business unit of the account. Same thing with parent-child business unit user. So all of that is just based on the security rule setup. But if you want to open it up, regardless of who is triggering it, then you use the organization. I'll say 100% of the time I've used this, I've had it in organization. But it's good to know that those other options are available. So what's the difference between triggers and action? This should be straightforward.
What's the difference between triggers and actions? Triggers start a flow and actions, so that's C.
Okay, yep, that's correct. All right. So I'll just take a, should I say, diversion, and let's just look at the approval request flow, because that's a very good one to know. So what was the flow I created just now? Doesn't it show up here? Oh yeah, because I shared it. All right. So say, once a book is created, right? Say I want to like send an approval request. So there's something called approvals. There's a connector called approvals. And you use this to send an approval request. So the way approval requests works is it sends an email, and you can choose whether you want to send it in Teams also. But it sends it to the user who you've specified the approval for. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, it's disappeared for me here. I think my cable is bad. 1 second. Let me see if I can bring it back up. Okay. Can you? No, you probably can't. I don't know why I shake it so much. Okay. Well, I can see my screen now. um. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. So we have approvals, as I was saying, right, which you used to send approval requests. So we have different ways of doing an approvals. But the easiest one is start and wait for an approval. In some cases, you can create an approval, then wait for the approval later down the line. But that's like a bit more advanced scenario. The easiest way is start and wait for an approval. So it's going to create the approval request, and it's going to, wait for that response. So it's going to wait for the person to respond to the approval request before continuing. So I can create a new connection. And so there are different options. So we have everyone must approve. So what this means is if I'm sending it to a list of people, everybody in that list must approve, right? Another option is first to respond. So in this case, if I'm sending it to a list of people, once the first person response that the person has basically responded on behalf of the whole group, right? So the everyone must approve is like saying, okay, everybody must respond. So if you've added 5 people, it's going to send it to all the 5 people. All the 5 people must respond before it progresses. So those are two out of the box ones. Custom responses is basically the same thing, but instead of approve reject, you can type in your own text, maybe accept or maybe yes or no or whatever is useful for that scenario. Oh, sequential approval. Are you for real? Wow, this is amazing. Never mind, I just saw this. So you didn't used to be able to do sequential approval out of the box, but it's quite interesting to see that you can do this. Hmm. Because hmm. Okay, okay. There's something I'm doing. So I built something called an approval engine in my organization, and it's built on top of Power Automate. But now that I see this, because I want to make an update to the solution, with this option, I'm having some ideas, but never mind, nothing. But yeah, so I guess the idea of sequential approval, I'll do a research to see how it works. But generally, the idea of sequential approval is it starts from the first person, then it moves to the next person. So in this one that says everyone must approve, it sends it to everybody at once. But sequential would be it sends it to the first person, then the next person, and it goes on and on like that. So this is interesting. I'm going to dig into this because potentially it might just be that this yeah, this is going to be very, very useful if it works the way, we all expect it to work. But let me not stray away. So let's start from everyone must approve, right? So let me say approve and let me assign it to myself. So maybe I'm like a manager or something. Okay. And I can say, please approve. So I'm just going to give some details and I can make it the name of the book. You can put an item link. So maybe there's like a link where the stuff you want them to approve is. You can do that. You can put a description also. Um, and so basically, you've done a start and wait for an approval. So what you generally do after that is to check what the response is. So was it approved? Was it rejected? So to do that, you can add a condition. And if we come over to dynamic content, so on the start and wait for an approval, you can see we have different dynamic contents, right? So if we come over here, I suspect is response summary. Um, so I think it's outcome, yeah. So outcome will tell you whether it was approved or not. So I can say if the outcome is equal to approve, so that shows that the whole thing was approved. So we can say if the outcome is approved, then do all of these things, right? If not, do nothing, right? Or maybe we send an email. So we can send an email to the person who created the record on SharePoint and say not approved. Um, so let me just say not approved. Then we can say the book title. Now, one other thing we can do, because remember the person has created the record. So we can say if it is not approved, then we delete the record, right? So because it wasn't approved, so we can say delete item. So from the SharePoint side, delete item. And we're going to select what the site is, what the list is, then what's the ID. And we have the ID from this initial action of when an item is created. Okay, so now we are going to delete it if it's not approved. So if I say test, I will be interested to try and test with a previous action. So if I test with this one, okay, so now you can see it's running. And when your flow is running, if you are looking at it live, you'll be able to see where it has gone, where it's at now. So now it's at start and wait for an approval. So let me check if I have an approval request. Not yet. So let's see. Okay, now you can see sent me an approval request. It says requested by Kayode and it's giving me the text. Please approve, things fall apart. So now I have the option to approve or reject. So let me reject in this case. No. And I'll click on submit. So now I've rejected that. And now you see I've gotten an email that says not approved, right? So ideally, if I come over here, things fall apart should disappear. Now you see there's no things fall apart here again because it wasn't approved. Now, if I run this again, if I run it again, and maybe this time I approve, I wonder if it's going to run. Oh, well, it still did, even though the actual record has been deleted. Okay, so now this is an interesting one because the record has been deleted, but it doesn't know it has been deleted because I ran a previous action. So if I say approved, I can click on submit, and it now says you now have 3 books, right? Which I understand why, because it's supposed to be 4, but because it has been deleted and I ran a previous action, it doesn't know. But to test it properly, maybe I add a new item and say Ali and Simbi. Okay. So I should get an approval request. It should, well, once you can also monitor a flow. So if I come here and I go back here, you can see different flow runs. I think this is probably it. No, that should not be it. Okay, now you can see it's triggered now. So I can go into it and see where it's at. So now it should be sending me a request. There it is. If I approve this, and now I get you now have 4 books, right? And once I come in here, I see I actually have 4 books. So yeah, that's the idea of approval request. So it's very useful. I'll say 80% of the flows you'll be creating within a business organization will be having approval requests. So it's good to understand how it works. Okay, so back to these guys. I think we'll be wrapping up very, very soon. It says you need to call a Power to make Cloudflow from a Canvas app. Do you have any questions regarding the approval requests?
No.
Okay, cool. So yeah, once you integrate it into the solution you're building, then we'll probably you probably test it more in action. But that's sequential. I'll suggest to check around and see what it's about. I'm seeing that for the first time. So it's a very new feature, but it's a very, very useful feature if it works well. You need to call a Power Automate Cloud Flow from a Canvas app that has been created within a solution. Which type of flow should you create? Instant Cloud Flow from within a solution. Okay. You need to validate data entered by a user into a table and show an error message if the data fails validation. What type of flow should you use? Well, that would depend on the type of app it is. That would depend if it's like a model driven app. You can use which I think is what they are doing here. So you can use um a workflow for that. You're editing a new Power Automate flow. What should you use to find any errors? Um, I think we talked about the flow checker, which you can use to find errors within the flow. So
Yeah.
yeah, um, those are a couple of things around Power Automate. I think Power Automate in itself is not too difficult. It's just about understanding the flow, right? Understanding the flow you're trying to create, what data you're getting from a previous action, what data you're passing into the next action. So it just falls down to understanding the actual problem you're trying to solve. But yeah, there's so much possibilities because if you look at the list of connectors, we have like a very, very big list, right? So, and you can literally connect them to each other. Um, Talking about that, I will kind of digress into something which I hope I've mentioned before, but just to be sure, I'm going to mention it again. There's something called DLP policies. Um, DLP policies. So I think under security, we have data privacy, data policy. Now, DLP policies allows you to restrict. So let me just call it DLP all. DLP policies allows you to restrict the connectors that can be used together. So remember just now I was saying, yes, look at this whole big list, right? Look at this big list, see all the connectors here. You can use them together. Yes, you can use them together, but if there's a DLP policy that says you cannot use them together, then you won't be able to use them together. So, for example, if you
Well,
search
such policies exist.
exactly, that's where I'm going. So, if you search X, which is Twitter, is a connector, and you can see there's something that says post a tweet, right? So, say you have some business sensitive data in Dataverse. What's there to stop someone from saying, oh, create an automation that every time somebody adds information to my Dataverse table, post it on Twitter? You can see how crazy that can be, right? So
Yeah.
you don't want people to be able to do that. That's why we have DLP policies. So with DLP policies, you can specify some connectors as business connectors, and you can specify some as non-business connectors, and you can specify some as blocked connectors, right? So with that, if it's a blocked connector, then the user will not be able to use it for anything, right? If it is in the business category, a business connector can only use can you can only use a flow that combines connectors within the same category. So maybe maybe I have Dataverse now. So let me come here and search for Dataverse. Right? So I can take Dataverse and say move to business. So what will happen now is Dataverse can only be used with this one. So right now, with the way I've set it up, I can't have a flow that, okay, well, I've not created it yet. But I cannot have a flow that uses Outlook and Dataverse right now because only dataverses in the business category. So basically, what you tend to do with DLP policies review is you look at your organizations and say, what are the connectors that we need to be able to create what we want, right? In many cases, you have dataverse here. Let me create something realistic. So I can say SharePoint, right? Makers tend to use SharePoint. We have Office 365 users. I think users groups, those are good. Outlook, that's good, right? What else? So all of them, I can move them. I thought I selected some stuff. So SharePoint, Office 365 users, Office 365 groups, Office 365 Outlook. So all of these I can move to business. So what this will mean is users can only create flows that integrate these ones together. So I can have a flow that integrates Dataverse and out and X, except I come here and I say move X into the business category.
Business.
So, but right now I can have a flow that uses X and Cisco or whatever because all of that belongs to the same category. Do you get the gist? So, flows
Yeah.
within the same category can be used together, but you can't use it with flows that are not within that category. And if you don't want them to be used at all, for whatever reason, you can put them in the blocked category, then nobody will be able to use it. Now, we also have something called the
I guess you can
default.
create new categories as well.
No, you cannot. So we have just this business, non-business, and blocked. Another thing you can do is we have something called the default group. And the idea of the default group is when a new connector is created. So you see here we have how many? 15, no, 1,500 connectors like in total, right? If a new connector is created, it goes into whatever you've set as a default group. So Microsoft approves a new connector. If you put it in blocked, then immediately that connector will be blocked until you go in there and move it somewhere else, right? In some cases, I think the default setting is for them to be in non-business. So it is available, but it can be used in only non-business scenarios. But if you have blocked, then you're saying I don't want it to be available at all until I review it, which this seems to be like the better security model, right? So until I review it and choose to decide whether it is business or non-business. So that's DLP policy. So it's good to note that, yeah, even though you have like loads of connectors available, you can still restrict which connectors should be used for your business scenarios, and just to make sure that you have like a very secure system. So yeah, that's where we'll wrap up for today. I don't know if you have any questions.
No.
Okay.
I'll just review
Yeah.
what we
All
have
right.
done
Yeah.
so far.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm going to check the stuff, make sure I share it out with you. Then yeah, also update the project to include the automation scenarios. Then I think when next we meet is going to be around Copilot Studio, and we just learn a couple of things around that, which is interesting. Okay, so yeah, that'll be it.
Yeah,
Have a
maybe
nice, yeah, go on.
talk to talk to
Farouk,
um
right? Yeah, yeah,
Farouk. Yeah,
yeah,
about the time. Maybe if he
yeah,
wants to do weekday, we could do twice. Yeah, a week, weekdays,
yeah,
2 hours, wherever
yeah,
you can come and
yeah,
implement to.
yeah, yeah. No worries, I'll pick that up. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Talk to you later. And if you have
All
any
right, then.
questions,
Thanks.
just send them over. All right.
Yeah.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.